you are very much a doctor of culture.
I am a culture doctor.
Yes. So what sparked that decision for you to take that path to study culture, especially Jamaican culture?
You know, I would have to say that my parents, being so such adventurous people, such open-minded people, such people grounded in Jamaican culture, I would have to say that this begins with them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was traveling out of Jamaica from I was an early teenager, 12. I wasn't even a teenager yet, actually. And I think being exposed to other cultures, being cued into what's happening in your own country. My parents were ones to travel from, you know, we every weekend we were somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
It's either we were visiting my grandparents, we were going to my uncle in St. Elizabeth, we were going to St. Anne to my other grandparents. You know, my parents were very adventurous people. And I think that made all the better for me to be an exposed human being.
Mm-hmm.
And the exposure, I tell people all the time, there's nothing like exposure, because it means you're not locked into your own insular, myopic perspective of the world. So with the richness of what is Jamaican culture, remember now I had my grandparents in tow. I would be spending time with my grandparents all the time. We used to hear those stories. I had my uncles around. People were visiting from abroad. A very rich context for exchange and exposure. But I think if I were to really now hone in on what is the experience that made me so interested in Jamaican culture, 3 things happened. One is my father was a policeman and he worked at events like Sunsplash.
I see.
So Reggae Sunsplash becomes something of a legendary thing in my experience, because my parents one year got it into their brain that they needed to have a stall and sell food. And so my uncle and the whole family, his children, and at this point I'm like 13, right? High school. So we were children at Sunsplash. And I can never forget Rita Marley on stage at Jarrett Park singing One Draw. I mean, you know, there's nothing significant about the song except that they had to pull up the song several times over because it was just released and it was taking life at Sunsplash. At Jarrett Park. More importantly though, Sunsplash comes into my consciousness prior to that year. Me being 13. So I tell you, we lived at Great River. And there was a major flood that happened in 1979. June 12 flood. And June 12 flood left the Great River Bridge. It broke down. At 4 o'clock one morning, we heard a big crash. The bridge broke down. And what's significant about this is not that there were 3 days of flooding, that, you know, and weeks later the bridge broke down because the banks had been so eroded, is that the people who went to Sunsplash that night could not get back to their places of abode in Hanover.
Right.
Because the bridge broke down and they had to use canoes now to cross the bridge. And so Sunsplash is, I started to hear about Sunsplash at age 8.
Right.
Going on 9, because there were people who couldn't get back to Negril and to, you know, wherever they were staying in these places. And so, all right, I hear about Sunsplash. You forget these things, you know. Is when me turn big woman, I try to reflect on the work that I'm doing, that I remember these things.
Yes.
So, music, therefore, becomes a major part. The music and the cultural experience around the consumption of music becomes a major part of what I am as a child.
Right.
So, you know, beyond Sunsplash goes defunct. Sumfest becomes the event. And I become really interested in music. So at Mount Alvernia High School, for example, we saw Super Cat in concert.
I see.
By the time I got to Montego Bay Community College, dance hall is absolutely my favorite, you know, genre of music to consume. I was going to Pier 1 to listen to Pieces music on a Friday night. I remember, in fact, the night Peter Tosh died. My father was dropping my sister and myself to Pier 1 for an evening of revelry. And we could hear the news about the shooting at Peter Tosh's house on the radio as my father was dropping us to Pier 1. So now listen now, my parents were there for the kind of people who had no problems with their children, and my mother has 2 daughters. Going to Pier 1, going to Sunsplash, going to Sumfest. Because this is Jamaica.
This is Jamaica.
This is the substance of who we are as a people. There's a way in which music is so much a part of what we do to celebrate.
Yes.
Celebrate anniversary, death.
Everything.
Celebrate marriage, celebrate your child born, christening, everything.
We celebrate everything.
So by the time I was 18,
yes,
and moving from Montego Bay now into university, I had already been, culturally aware and well established in terms of my likes and dislikes in terms of music. And then my parents were party people too. So by 5 years old, my parents were having their 5th wedding anniversary party, bashment. I remember dancing the chucky out on the lawn. My parents would just, be hosting people and parties and events at the house. Lots of food and fun.
Right.
But by the time I went to university now, I was also quite formed and established in terms of my academic interests. So from second form in high school was really an important time because I was doing a whole heap of things. But I certainly fell in love.
Such as?
I certainly fell in love with geography. I was traveling out to Jamaica by the time I was 12 in second form.
Yes.
I was, interested in geography. I knew that much. Yeah, at 12, you're not doing very much except that you're becoming yourself, right?
Right.
So I knew that I was going to university to study geography. And I did a degree in geography. And geography made me even more aware of the world. More aware of, the politics of culture. And I don't think I was a great geography student. I used to fall asleep in some of my classes, especially if they were 8 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But I made an impression enough it made an impression on me, and I made an impression on certainly my teachers enough for me to know that I wanted to do postgraduate work in geography. I remember saying to one of my teachers, I want to do a postgraduate degree in geography. And she says, no.
Okay.
She said, no. She said, no, go and work first. And I did exactly that. University was also, my undergraduate years very interesting. I got kicked off Mary C. Cole Hall in the first 3 weeks of my arrival.
Why?
You break a rule, you get kicked off. The warden decided that it was not appropriate for me to remain on the hall, even though I was out of Montego Bay as a student coming all the way from the country. The fact is, I was kicked off hall.
Which rule did you break, Sonjah?
Me not gonna talk about that right here, so now. The fact is, me was kicked off the hall.
Great.
And there came another moment for me to say to myself, but what that have to do with me becoming somebody? And today, clearly, I'm still at the same university. I function in a capacity where I can share those kinds of stories with people.
Yes.
Enough to have them understand that building character is not a smooth sailing path. It's about a rocky road that allows you to look at your shoes and look at your feet and look at your toes and say, are you going to go forward or not?
Right.
Right? So my undergraduate years at university were quite interesting. Me never get in no other trouble. Me wasn't one to smoke weed.
Right.
I was offered these things. But I was more interested in the culture, which is where I'm getting back to. That I was fetting and I was consuming music. I remember the off-campus limes. I remember getting so interested in Portland, where we went for an off-campus lime, that I went home and told my parents about Portland. And they said, let's go for a weekend.
Portland is fantastic.
And we went for a weekend in Portland.
Yes.
So I was also one to share my experiences. I was learning and growing, and also quite interested in sharing and teaching.
Yes.
And just, to say that by the time I was 9 years old, I knew that I was interested in teaching.
9.
Yeah, ma'am, I used to go home from school at 6 and 7 and go home and play school in the backyard with the hibiscus bush. I used to go and call out the students' names, give them homework, B2 must get disciplined, and play school. And so it's so funny because even when we got summer holidays, I knew I wanted to be in school. Weekends and summer holidays were kind of weird times because I wanted to be in school.
Interesting. So you really couldn't function in this new virtual education?
No, man, I could function, man. And I do function. I have to teach.
As a student?
No, I would function because what happens in every era is that you adjust.
Mm-hmm.
That's what human beings do. You get thrown a situation and you adjust. You either sink or swim. You adjust.
True.
So I knew I wanted to teach. I wanted to be in school. I wanted to be a leader. And I suppose even unconsciously, these things just they happen, you know.
Yes.